Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Carrie Hart-Morris, and on behalf of AHRA, I want to thank you for participating in today's webinar, How Good is Good Enough? AHRA would like to thank today's speakers, Lee Taychuk and Kenneth Schaefer, for sharing their knowledge, expertise, and experience, and to SpeechCheck for sponsoring today's program. Audio CDs of today's presentation and previous presentations are available. Please contact AHRA at 1-800-334-2472 or check out our website at www.ahraonline.org for more information. If you'd like to ask a question during the webinar, please type it into the chat box on the lower right corner of your screen. Questions will be answered at the conclusion of the webinar. And now to introduce our speakers. If there were black belts in radiology documentation, Lee Taychuk would be the Grand Master. After 20 years of working every day with hospitals around the United States, there are few documentation quality issues with which Lee is unfamiliar. A former bartender, bond trader, and an unabashed Chicago sports enthusiast, she is an ambassador for the importance of documentation quality. Kenneth Schaefer is a 25-year veteran of the medical documentation industry. He is a published author on clinical documentation topics and has been a transcriptionist, quality assurance manager, trainer, business owner, and customer service director. An engaging communicator and a pastor in his church, Ken enjoys spending time with his family, CrossFit, and distance running. His most unusual job ever? Volunteer juggling instructor. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Lee and Ken.
Good morning, everybody. This is Lee Taychuk, and I am the founder and CEO of SpeechCheck. Oops, having a little bit of technical difficulty here. There we go. And I'm also the founder and CEO of Keystrokes Transcription Service, one of the largest transcription services in the industry. The reason I point that out is because I want all of you to know that I've been passionate about quality in medical documentation for over 20 years. Radiology has been a big part of my career, and speech recognition technology, while it has improved over those 20 years, still needs some human intervention to be successful. It's my personal mission to ease radiologists' frustration with speech technology by helping them become more efficient, proficient, and productive. We use those words a lot at SpeechCheck because they're very important items that need to go hand in hand with accuracy and quality. And that's why I'm here today presenting to you all.
And my name is Ken Schaefer. I've spent more than 25 years in medical documentation. I've worked a good bit directly with radiologists and with documentation processes. I am fanatical about getting things right. I used to run a decent-sized medical transcription company, and for the most part, I enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun, but occasionally we would make mistakes on reports. And more than anything, I hated getting client calls when that happened, because after a while, you run out of things to say. First, you apologize, and then you say something like, well, I'll be more careful. Sorry we didn't get that right, doctor. I'll give you a different transcriptionist. I'll put more reports to quality assurance, and so on. If you've been in radiology for more than 5 years and have ever worked with a non-automated documentation process, you've probably heard some variation or maybe all of those reasons or excuses. The reason it's so hard to apologize for a documentation error is very simple. Whenever anyone makes a mistake in documentation, whenever documentation is inaccurate, it creates at least the appearance of incompetence. No matter your level of competency, it makes you look silly, it makes you look foolish. And I love my job at SpeechCheck because I'm a part of helping radiologists to look good. And just a little note about my voice, I know I sound very, very hoarse. Trust me, I do not feel nearly as poorly as I sound. So I'll be muting my microphone in the off slides where Lee is, and I've got a stack of cough drops here, and I'm going to pound one each time I'm taking a break. Thanks for your patience with that. Lee, I think your microphone's on mute.
I apologize. This is Lee Taychuk, and I was muted. That won't happen again. I'm going to go over really quick our scope and learning objectives for today. We are going to identify the reasons that quality documentation is a critical component of any radiology organization. We're going to explore those moving pieces of a quality improvement plan for your radiologist and for your entire department or facility. And we're going to introduce 3 steps that you should take to measure and improve the accuracy of final reports being sent out to referring physicians, patient charts, patient portal. And actually, we're going to give you a few more steps than 3. By the time we were finished, we realized we have 5 steps. So you will have 5 actionable steps that you can take with you. And as always, we promise not to be boring. So here's an example of not boring. We're going to share the results of a recent study that we did internally, and the results will shock you. But first, we want to go back to basics a little, and I'm going to turn it over to my horse friend, Ken there.
Yeah, horse friend in this case is not a master of the equestrian events. As we're starting out, we want to make sure we understand what we mean by final documentation, because if you're running a radiology department, or if you're at some level of administration, maybe you're a radiologist, technician, this may not be something you think about all the time. Your concern is divided over a lot of tasks, so we want to make sure that we are talking about the same thing. And as you are eating lunch or kind of looking up and down at this, we just want to make sure that when we're talking about final documentation, we are saying that we are referring to reports that have been signed off and distributed to ordering physicians, to hospital floors, the electronic record, patient portals. In the past, those reports were on pieces of paper and were actually signed by a physician. Today, of course, that signature happens electronically. So when I think of a final report, I think of a report that you cannot undo by hitting, that you cannot make a change to by hitting Control-Z. It's a report that when it comes back and it looks wrong, there's some kind of glaring error in it, some typo, some medical word that's out of place. You have what I call an uh-oh moment. You have some sort of a physiologic reaction. Think of the reaction you have when you look up in your rearview mirror and see the flashing lights of a police car, or that sinking feeling in your stomach knowing that you are about to have a lot of extra work or apologies to make. Your palms may be sweating, the sudden urge to go to the restroom, or in worst case, update your interview suit and your resume. Those are final reports, and how we fix them today, we can measure the number of errors that we have in final reports largely by the number of addendums, because of course once the report is signed electronically and we want to fix it or make a correction, we can't unsign it, so we actually have to make an addendum. Once distributed, these reports are part of the permanent legal record, and they stay there. And if y'all remember that Seinfeld clip from the 90s where Elaine talks about her permanent record, it's a phrase that struck fear into our hearts since we were small children in grade school. That's going to go on your permanent record. Well, in this case, our permanent records extend to the healthcare documentation of people that we may not see again ever, or may be there for 10, 20, 30 years with our facility's name, the name of the radiologist, and everybody associated with the report, but inaccurate in the permanent record. Go ahead, Lee.
So the question that we always ask ourselves is, who cares? Well, the cynical answer to that is no one cares, until there's a problem, at which time everyone cares. So there's an old saying that says there's never enough time to do something right, but there's always enough time to do it over. And that's the truth. We all know radiologists who act as if documentation quality will never, ever come back and bite them, but it can in many ways, as we all know. With our referring physicians, it might be in the form of a blooper. It might be something we laugh about. It might come back in a complaint form. It might just come back, oh, you might want to look at this. But it can come back to bite us, and it can come back legally as well, which we will get to in a few minutes. I do know that probably everyone has had a documentation mistake that they would pay any amount of money to undo. This could be in a final report. This could be in an email that you sent and accidentally hit reply all. A lot of mistakes in final radiology reports never see the light of day, but they do end with an insurance settlement and gag orders. They're not talked about publicly, but they are whispered about in meetings and in the hallways. And if you haven't had the pleasure of experiencing one of these situations, your colleagues certainly have. And that's why we have a lot of people on this webinar today. So the real answer of who cares is radiologists care. Even if they're frustrated with the system, they don't like using speech recognition, or they feel that they were bullied into the technology, they still care about the final report. It's their livelihood, their reputation, and their core belief is that patient care is all that matters. So who cares? patients, referring physicians, lawyers, and the radiologists. Everyone should. For your department, final reports are the only tangible product of the work performed. Think about it. Without the interpretation and the report, the films mean nothing and we're just a waste of everyone's time. So sometimes it feels like we're regressing in terms of quality. And there's this saying from hundreds and hundreds of years ago saying, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. We can't worry about it to the point that we're paralyzed, but we do have to take steps to ensure that accuracy is as high as possible. So let's think back a few years before your department went to speech recognition. What was the process? Most likely, the radiologist would dictate into a microphone, a phone, or even a tape, and a transcriptionist would get that work and transcribe it. They would send it back to the radiologist, who would review the report and either send it back to the transcriptionist for corrections, make corrections himself or herself, or sign it off as final. It took a couple of hours, but the reports were pretty accurate, very accurate. Those radiologists were picky. They made sure that the reports were accurate, but more importantly, they had a transcriptionist adding that extra layer of protection, pointing out discrepancy, questioning things that didn't sound right, sometimes even being able to call and say, this isn't what you usually say, is this what you meant to say? So what happened? Now it's acceptable to have errors, and we might laugh at those bloopers or share funny words and phrases, and we overlook typos, but those same radiologists who were picky and obsessive about quality now let the reports go through with errors, saying that the reports are good enough, that they don't have time to keep reviewing them over and over again. What does that mean? Does that mean that errors are now okay? Why are errors okay now, but they weren't before? Why has technology pushed accuracy and quality to a back burner? Well, it doesn't have to be that way.
Another way of answering the question about who cares has to do with the 5 areas of risk associated with quality documentation. And at SpeechCheck, we tend to talk about these different times to different people, different audiences, but we'll just give them all to you. We always talk about the referring physician base. Pretty much every radiology group that we talk to has lost at least one physician, and usually more of people that order cases because the documentation isn't good enough. And if you go back to my example of when I was running the transcription company, we would get the call about a documentation error. Well, if those calls are going directly to the radiology group, eventually the ordering physician gets tired of seeing what he thinks are nonsensical errors and doesn't understand why things aren't right, and believes that inattention to documentation could indicate inattention to clinical interpretation. Whether or not that's true doesn't matter. It's the perception, and that affects the reputation of the physician. The physician loses, and it's interesting because if we have a great reputation, it takes a long time for it to become tarnished by anything, usually. But once it is tarnished, it actually takes even longer to win it back. And both of those categories are associated with financial risk. You lose ordering physicians, you lose money, you lose revenue. In addition to which, if you have documentation that's improper, you could be leaving money on the table, or you could be overbilling. You might get denials that then have to be reworked instead of not having to be looked at all. Documents have to be looked at 2 or 3 times in order to make sure that they're processed and paid correctly, and that's a big deal. Cash is king in every business, and especially in healthcare. And there's a legal risk. Again, when we're talking about mistakes, we don't want to we don't want to be negligent, and we don't even want to give the appearance of being negligent. And again, no matter what, poor documentation has at least the appearance of negligence. And it certainly has the appearance of negligence to a group of ordinary people, like, say, a jury. And finally, and maybe this should have been first, is patient care. Poor documentation and sentinel events are occasionally, maybe often, a tag team. They go together. So just to reiterate, the reason that quality documentation is a critical component of your organization is that you don't want to lose your referring physician base or your reputation. You want to eliminate or at least drastically reduce financial and legal risk. And of course, all of us want to improve patient care and the patient's overall experience. I'm going to click it back over to Lee. And Lee, was that your screensaver, or is that your next vacation?
That was my screensaver. I apologize, everyone. Now you know we're really live. So there are 5 pieces to the improvement process: define, measure, analyze, improve, and control. And we're going to go over each of those steps with you, and then we're going to tie it all together in a nice little package with a bow on top, giving you actionable steps that you can follow to get your improvement process going in the right direction. So the first question you need to ask yourselves is what to measure. There are plenty of things that you measure in your department every day. Quality in the documentation is probably not one of those, and if it is, it's probably not a formal process. At least that's what we've found. If your organization is different, I apologize and I applaud you. But we have not found very many who actually have a formal process in place. It's time-consuming, it can be expensive, and let's face it, sometimes we really don't want to know what we actually see there. So how can you measure this, and what do you measure, and are you looking at the same things as others? Well, the great thing would be is we had an industry standard, but we don't. We have talked to everyone here at SpeechCheck. We have talked to the Joint Commission, we have talked to AHRA, RSNA, RBMA, and ACR. Everyone agrees that quality is absolutely a critical piece of the process in radiology and of the workflow, but no one has set standards in place. So what we did here at SpeechCheck is we went back to traditional transcription. Again, that's how my keystrokes background plays in. And we went over our contracts for outsourcing and the requirements for in-house staff. And we also talked to the AHDI, the Transcription Association governing body in our industry. And the standard has always been 98% or better with no critical errors. We took that and applied it to other businesses and did some research, and 98% seems to be an across-the-board quality standard to meet. Of course, 100% is what we should all strive for, but we are being realistic. And while there is no governing standard, we know that there should be, and it could be your standard. In fact, it might not be as obvious or written as eloquently as the Constitution, but having something in place can really make the difference when the you-know-what hits the fan. So use common sense. Obviously, something is going to be a little more important if it's the wrong patient on the wrong report or than a misplaced comma. So defining what to measure is the first step. You need to kind of join the herd, decide on the standard for your department, accepted industry standard, or other. It will only work if it's what works for you. We just give the guideline of 98% or better with no critical errors as a benchmark, a standard for us all to start with. So our first action step is actually define. Define the standard for your organization. Then you're going to ask, how do we measure this? And I talked a second ago about, some errors are more critical than others. So what you need to do is you need to set the error codes based on guidelines from all of those organizations I talked about, ACR, AHRA, RSNA, AMA, Joint Commission, etc. You want to make sure that you're hitting all the compliance issues, that you're not getting denials because of the documentation, or that your coders and billers can't do their job because the documentation is incorrect. You want to weight those errors based on the criticalness, I don't even know if that's a word, but we're going to use it, the criticalness of the errors. Again, commas should not be weighted as heavily as wrong patient demographics. Something that we see often are addendums. Addendums due to errors, not due to previous films being available or additional information coming or the radiologist deciding to add something. We're talking strictly about errors that are due, and addendums that are due to errors. The error codes are how you're going to define them. Break them down. We use 16 different error codes when we are measuring quality, and those range from the wrong patient on the wrong report all the way down to using keyboard corrections rather than the voice, which is a no-no. Some of the common errors we see, I'm going to start with something that we see often that is critical, is a discrepancy between the body and the impression in a report. Now, think back when we used light boxes and we put labels, sticky labels at the bottom of the films when we're sending them to the referring physicians, and all that was there was the impression. Well, our referring physicians are creatures of habit, and they still will look for the impression first. They want to know if it's worth their time to read the rest of the report. If they see it's negative, that's gospel to them. They're not going to read the rest of the report. So when there's a discrepancy between the findings and the impression of the report, it can make the difference on a diagnosis and a treatment plan. It can be very serious, it can be deadly, or it can be minor, but any way you look at it, having that discrepancy is a critical error. We also see a lot, and this was always something that was corrected on the transcription side, discrepancies between left and right. The order might be for a right arm, but the entire dictation says left, and then the impression says right. Which one is it? A transcriptionist would have called the department and said there's a discrepancy, but the speech recognition engine doesn't know to recognize that. It's a machine, it's technology, it's not human. And even more so, when a reader sees something like that, even whether it be the referring physician or the patient, they don't always know which one is correct. And even if everything else is right in the report, they're confused. In their eyes, everything is wrong. Another thing that we see a lot of problems with, and I don't care which speech recognition engine or software you're using, are numbers. Dates, measurements, and dosages are often the first things lawyers look for in medical litigation during documentation summaries. The numbers are a legal record and they must be correct, but the speech recognition engines do have problems with those. I'm sure you've seen 18 becomes 80, 15 becomes 50. We see dates that are absolute nonsense. They're so far in the future or so far in the past or really just don't make sense. It's very important, especially when you're talking about measurements and dosages, that those are correct. There's some little words that are really, really important that we also see a lot of errors with, and those are know versus known or low, new, a versus the. Those little words can pack the biggest punch, and they're overlooked because your brain is very efficient. As you are reading your report over again, or as a radiologist is rereading their report, those words, their brains let them see what they think they should be seeing, and those little words are missed. Many of you have been on other presentations, and you've seen our little word teaser where how many times does the letter F appear, and it's true. Those little words are often missed. If you haven't seen that, just ask us for it. It's kind of fun to share with your department because everyone gets it wrong. I shouldn't say everyone. 99.9% of everyone gets it wrong. So one thing also that I want to point out is it's important to have the spell check turned on in your system. You'd be surprised how many things come out wrong without that spell check turned on, but it is something that we see. Another thing is it's very important to weight the errors. As I said, everything has a different meaning. A discrepancy is different than a misplaced comma, or missing the word and is different than missing the word no. So make sure that you weight those errors according to their seriousness. And then lastly on this is consistency. Consistency is really the key when measuring quality. You want to look for the same things in every report and weight them the same. And you want to weight them the same and check for the same things on every radiologist. If you customize it, your numbers will be skewed. So set a standard and stick to it. Our second action step is measure one thing. Start with just one thing. And if you measure just the addendums that are coming out of your department due to errors, you're going to be surprised. Check that on how many are coming out on a monthly basis, weekly? What does that add up to annually? How much time does it take to redo an addendum? And how much could you possibly lose in terms of patients and referring physicians and future business because an addendum has to be done due to a mistake? Again, only addendums that are due to errors, not due to previous films or additional information, should be measured with this. So while I believe you should measure everything about the quality, start with one thing. Count your addendums and see if that's a great place for your department to start.
Now, if you track your addendums over time, that's going to actually lead you into our next area here. Once you know what you're going to measure and how you're going to measure it, we want to analyze that data. And the great thing about, actually the important thing about quality is you don't want to measure it just once, because quality is an ongoing process. And if you think about doing employee reviews in your HR, you don't do a review one time and then never review an employee again. You review an employee annually or quarterly or however often. But we want to do the same with quality. Any process that's dedicated to improvement is not a one-time event. It is a long-time event. So we want to track the trends. We want you to enlist your resident Excel junkie. Now, you all are radiology departments and radiology professionals. You might be the resident Excel junkie, or you might have another one there. And in the next slide, we're going to show you a graph. This is something that we de-identified from one of our clients, and I'll just walk you through this because what you see is how we charted their quality progress over time. And we're going here on a scale from 0 to 100%, and it's by radiologist on the left-hand side, and time is the column. So quarter one for year one is the first column, quarter three is the third column in the same year. So what's interesting here is in I think almost every case, if not every case, you're going to see improvement. Every once in a while there's a dip. But so over our first radiologist improved about, improvement score of 1.54. Our 14th radiologist, he had a very dramatic improvement in score. He started at 90% and ended at 98.88. Now, how do you think that happened? Well, this is how it happened with this particular radiologist. As you are analyzing data that you get on quality, you want to figure out the best way to share it with your radiologist, because if you analyze something and give no feedback, what you're basically going to have is I guess you wouldn't actually have anything. You'd have like a 3-ring binder full of analysis. Nothing would change. So you want to track, over time, you want to track your statistics and share it as part of your routine. When are you going to cover that? In this particular case, we didn't even need to share it. Really, what we did was we took the quarter one scores and pasted them on the door. Only when we did that at the facility, they were not de-identified. Radiologists do not become radiologists by being satisfied with a 90% when somebody else in his group scores a 98.3. And so we saw an immediate improvement in their scores simply by posting this and then going over with the radiologist their feedback. The point, and Lee will talk a little bit about how we review and communicate with radiologists, how we recommend that, but when would that happen? Maybe that's in their staff meeting every week or every month. Maybe in your environment, you just have a relationship with 1 or 2 key lead radiologists, and you communicate to those individuals, and they communicate out to the rest of their group. Might be an email, might be a staff lounge door, which we've actually found to be pretty effective. The idea is that it needs to become part of your routine. Whatever you do, make it a part of your formal management process. Look, in radiology, we track everything, right? We track everything. Is there anyone on this line who cannot tell me the turnaround times for your department by month and by modality for the last 10 years? So you may need to track something slightly different than other people. If you are a large multi-specialty clinic or a large hospital, you might have more than one modality and multiple positions that you need to track. You're a kind of a smaller clinic and you might just do 1 or 2 modalities. Maybe the modality distinction is not important. But whatever you do, track it as part of your formal process. The same way you track turnaround time and safety compliance. It is just as important to know if we are winning or losing the quality battle in documentation as it is to know if we are meeting our contracted or our target turnaround times across the board. So once you know what you're going to measure and how you're going to measure, you're going to start to play around with Excel, and you're going to start to track your trends over time so you can look for improvement and you can look for a drop-off in attention to this very important area.
It's very important to realize that the goal is not perfection coming out of the gate. The goal is progress. You need to first measure where you are, see where your areas of improvement are, see where your areas of extreme improvement are needed, and strive for progress first, and then perfection is going to fall into place after that. So this goes back to setting your standards. If your goal is 98% or better accuracy with 0 critical errors, track the improvement. See if, first of all, critical errors disappear. Then show how many radiologists in each measurement period have scores over 98%. Show that it's tracking in the right direction. And really highlight the successes rather than just always attacking or criticizing what isn't perfect. So the action step number 3 is to call each radiologist to the principal's office. And as you notice, first we put a little funny one up, and then because that'll help you remember. But write this one down. It's important to review in person, one-on-one, the results of an audit with your radiologist. They don't want to be called out on their errors. They don't want to have something that says like walnuts in the chest and have everyone see that they missed that. So review them in person with them. And make sure that you do point out the reports that are perfect and that the things that they're doing very well, that they're handling the system well, that they're clear dictators, that they're really not having any critical errors, and then you can work on the small things one by one. We kind of laugh on one of the improvement process things, saying control. Can you imagine trying to control your radiologist? You can persuade them, you can practically beg them, but you cannot control them. So again, just to repeat myself, you might want to jot this down. The moving pieces of a quality documentation plan are to define. You want to say, first of all, this is what we are going to do. You're going to measure using those things that you defined. You're going to analyze those results, and you're going to improve the results over time by working individually with the radiologist, and then you're going to control the results by continuing to measure and making sure that the trend is upward in improvement and not sliding back down when they're not being watched. So let's figure out together what those mean to you and to your organization. So action step number 4, engrave your standards on the wall, tape them to all their monitors, communicate okay, Ken wrote this, I didn't, so communicate the blank out of your expectations. In other words, over-communicate. Make sure that your radiologists, first of all, know that you're going to be measuring, but don't tell them when, because people will always be on their best behavior when they're being graded. But let them know that you're going to be doing this. Let them know what you're going to be looking for and the reasons that you're doing this. Let them know that this isn't to critique them in a negative way, but instead to improve documentation for everyone, which will make their lives easier and will help ease some of their frustration. Again, over-communicate. Constantly strive for improvement.
Now that we've covered that, we want to talk a little bit about who should do the measuring. And we spend all of our time working in quality assurance and especially with radiology documents. So we use some language that I want to clarify, and this is the language that we use. You will hear us use the phrase, listen to the voice. And what we mean, it's not a reference to a reality or talent competition television show. When we talk about listening to the voice, we believe that the missing component of quality in radiology departments today has to do with the verification that what the physician dictates when he's interpreting a study is what he actually ends up signing. And in many, 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 many cases, what we find is it's not the case. It's not true. He's dictated something different than what he actually finally signed. So when we talk about listening to the voice, we are talking about literally queuing up the recorded dictation and listening to what was dictated while validating that against what was signed by the physician. Now that requires a very special skill set. Not everybody has it, not everybody could do it, and that's why it's important to talk about who should do it. So we have some choices, got about 5 different choices for you. The first could be an in-house transcriptionist. Now listen, if you've gone to speech recognition and you're on 100% speech rec, we applaud you. We think every facility that invests in speech recognition software should maximize it 100%, which means, unfortunately, eliminating a lot of positions. If you are one of the hospitals that has not eliminated all of your transcriptionist positions, you may have an in-house transcriptionist who probably has this skill. She has the ability to go back, listen to what was dictated, compare it to what the physician signed, and let you know what kinds of errors she finds. However, fewer and fewer hospitals have these people on staff. You might find the skill set within your HIM department, but the more we deal with hospitals, the more we find HIM and radiology, it's not that they're enemies, it's just that they don't talk that much anymore, simply because now that everything is electronic, there's less and less reason for their paths to cross. It's possible, maybe even likely, your HIM department has people that are either former transcriptionists, maybe coders that might have this skill set. They could go back and listen to the voice and compare it to what was transcribed or signed off in the speech recognition system, but they may not be willing to free up that resource, or they might not have it. If they do have it and you can work that in internally, it can be a win for everybody. Here's something interesting we're seeing with more and more facilities, which is we have radiologists who like to do this themselves as part of their peer review process. Now, that's awesome. There are a few issues. We know PQRS is a big deal. To be clear, we're auditing whether or not the documentation produced was correct, not whether the clinical interpretation was correct. And we believe that you probably need to validate, on average, substantially fewer clinical interpretations than you do documentation quality issues. In other words, we review, when we're doing an outside review, we review more documents than you would inside a typical PQRS process. But if physicians want to do it, that's great, because then they're doing it with their peers. And they're going to learn a lot, and they're going to challenge each other. The potential problems with this are, there's really only two. One is it's hard to do enough documents and have it pay, because radiologist time is the most expensive time in your department. And the other problem is kind of a counterintuitive one, and you wouldn't know it unless you've done what Lee and I have done for a living, which is that it's not uncommon for us to play back dictation for the physician that dictated it, and for him not to be able to understand what it was that he actually said. You may think that I'm making that up, but I assure you that I am not. I've actually had physicians tell me, it's not my job to be able to understand the dictation, that's the job of your people. I cannot tell you what I said. It's up to you to interpret that. So, physicians may not have the actual skill. Your radiology techs might be able to do it, that's a fourth option. What we find with radiology techs is they know the lingo. They know the lingo of radiology, but they do not know the language of clinical interpretation. They may or may not have the skill to actually listen to what was dictated and validate its accuracy against what was signed. And of course, this is going to sound a little bit self-serving, and that's okay, because it's, when I say self-serving, I mean it serves us, so that's not necessarily bad. You might want to outsource this function. You can outsource it to SpeechCheck. There might be other companies you can use. That's what we do, so we are far from objective, but this is what I would say. When you outsource an audit, almost by definition, you get objectivity around the results of the audit. And what do I mean by that? When you do a financial audit of a publicly traded company, you don't want an affiliated CPA firm to do the audit. You don't want the CEO's sister to do the audit of the company. Why? You want a level of objectivity. And so we all know that in many radiology departments, okay, that's not any radiology department, that's in any group of two or more people anywhere, there are a certain amount of politics, feelings, and prejudice involved. There's history. Maybe this physician didn't want to switch to that speech recognition system. Maybe he championed another one. Maybe he was married to the transcriptionist that you fired. Whatever the reason, he might have a dog in the hunt, and it might not be the hunt of improving your documentation. So just as you wouldn't give a financial audit to an affiliated firm, it can make sense to give a quality audit to an outside company. In fact, one other reason is that internal audits, errors can be underreported in internal audits. In some of our research, we actually came across a study showing that physicians in general tend to underreport documentation errors that they self-discover. And if you think about the implications, what are we actually saying? What we're saying is a physician finds an error in a report that he signed. Is he going to be motivated necessarily to make a change to that error? It may or may not be in his immediate short-term best interest to do that. And that's why objectivity and dispassion in this process may best serve the interests of your organization. You can accomplish some of that as well by just using other internal folks that are not part of your department. So here's our deal. We love doing this kind of work, but it matters more that it gets done than who does it. You just want to avoid conflicts of interest and get qualified people. So here is our action step. I think this is our fifth one. We would challenge you to actually audit 50 reports for each radiologist. It wouldn't matter who did it, but you need them to have this skill, even if it may not be the best person you can find, but have them have this skill where they can listen and see what was signed and see if those match. And I want to show you another slide. We're going to be talking about this a little bit more in some of our upcoming content, but here at SpeechCheck, we believe we've audited more reports with the specific goal of assessing their quality than anybody. And so we thought it would be interesting to do, this is why listening to the voice is important. We thought it would be interesting to do this study. We took two different of our auditors, and we took 2,500 radiology reports. We had one auditor read all of the reports and mark up the errors that she found just by reading them. We then had another auditor actually listen to the reports while she was auditing them. She used the voice. She listened to the voice. And what we found was the auditor who did not have access to the voice missed about 62% of the errors that were found. And by way of a side note here, let me just say that a lot of times when I'm meeting with radiology directors, they'll ask what we do. I explain that we're not software. I explain that we are a manual, a high-level professional auditing service. And they ask, why would I need that? And then I ask them this question. If I were to sit down and actually review 100 of your reports, what would I find? Usually the radiologist, the radiology director, or whoever it is I'm talking with, stops making eye contact, looks down, and kind of shuffles the feet a little bit. That's the response that we commonly get. And that's okay. That's our mission as a company, is to help improve documentation quality. But in 2,500 reports, we find a lot of errors, and we'll be unpacking some of those at our time in we'll talk about it in Vegas in just a little bit. But if you audit 50 reports as an action step for each one of your physicians, my guess is you will be astounded at what you find, and you may or may not find it in the physicians where you expect to find the errors. Go ahead, Lee.
Again, just to reiterate, we want you to review with your radiologist in person, one-on-one, but we really want that to be a gentle review. We don't want them to be angry at the process, but what we have found is they're very receptive. I have to tell you, when I went in for my first review with a radiologist when we first started SpeechCheck, I was scared, shaking in my shoes, because I didn't know what kind of reaction I was going to get. And I was pleasantly surprised, and have been every single time since, and everyone within our organization will agree. Radiologists are competitive by nature, they're highly intelligent, and they're very educated. They want to produce a quality document. They want their work to reflect on their intelligence and education, and they want to make sure that things are being done right. So they're very receptive to feedback. And that's going to surprise you, I know, but it's true. They really want to improve, and they love seeing when their scores go up. One of the first radiologists I worked with had a very low score. It was in the 70s, and he's pointing at the paper pretty adamantly saying, I don't get C's. You need to change this. I only get A's. And we worked together, and he's actually one of our highest scoring radiologists right now. He has come very close to 100%. He's at 99.9% the last 2 quarters. But he was motivated, and he was receptive to the errors and to suggestions on how to improve. Now, it's not just about proofreading. It's about tips and tricks of how to do that, how to put templates in place and make sure those templates are correct. There's a lot of things that go into it, but to produce a quality document is something that interests them and that they're willing to work at. So focusing on that improvement is very important. This is one of my favorite slides we're going to do right now, because what I found when we were doing the research is amazing. People tend to fall back in bad habits, and now I know why. We've all heard what measured gets improved, and that's true. So here it is. It takes 3 days to form a bad habit and a whopping 30 days to break a habit or to form a new good habit. So 3 days for a bad habit, 30 days for a good habit. No wonder we fall into things like, not everyone, smoking, drinking, cigarettes, even drugs, or using technology, eating. Bad habits are easier, and sometimes they're fun. You'd rather have a piece of chocolate cake than a cucumber. But it takes hard work to form good habits, and you need that solid foundation. So again, we're creatures of habits. We only do what we know, and we improve only when a newer, better, faster way of doing something differently is introduced. Usually, it's introduced when there's a problem or an error being pointed out in a pretty big way. So I have a couple of real-life examples to show you. Remember, what gets measured gets improved. This is a picture of my son, Jeffrey. I like to look at him, so I included him in our slides, but I have an example that makes a lot of sense. Last fall, he took a chemistry class, and since he had chemistry several times in high school and was a good student, he said, I'm going to take this as pass-fail. As a parent, I didn't really care as long as he gets the credit. The next semester, he took the follow-up class to it, and he was struggling. And when he and I talked about it, the reason he was struggling was because he had taken the previous class as pass-fail, and it had covered more than he had covered in his high school classes, obviously. Because it was pass-fail, he only did what he needed to do to pass. He didn't need to work extra hard and get that A or that A plus or even a B. He just needed to pass. It's like that with everything. If it's being measured, you want a better score. If average is okay, average is okay. Now, a saying that he told us recently we don't agree with is that C's get degrees, and he needs to get A's. But it's like that with your radiologist. They need to see the higher scores that truly reflect the quality and accuracy of their reports, which reflects on your entire department. Now, talking about bad habits, this is a little drastic. There was a man in the United Kingdom, a physician, who decided to quit smoking, and he struggled, and he tried many, many times. So he took an extreme measure. He took himself to a deserted island for 30 days to quit smoking. Now, you might think that that's a little crazy, and he thought so too, and as did his family, but his reasoning really made sense. And first of all, I have to tell you it worked, but it did make sense. It took him away from his family, yes, for 30 days, but it probably gave him 30 years more with them because of improved health and lower risks. So again, what would you do to change a habit? The biggest thing I would say is to lay that foundation down, or to not have those habits in the beginning, but that's a whole nother webinar. So here's something. What if there was no speedometer in your car? How fast would you drive? How fast would you know? How would you know how fast you're going? So what repercussions would there be for not knowing how fast you're going? You could get a ticket. You could run into a very unfriendly cop who writes a bigger ticket, which means that you might need a lawyer. That could end up with a court having a judge or a jury decide if you're going to have a monetary punishment or just a slap on the wrist, or if you're going to lose your license. That same thing can happen with documentation that goes into litigation. If there's a health case, a medical case, malpractice, and the documentation is incorrect, it could result in monetary punishment, loss of license, and a lot of expense and hassle with lawyers and judges. So there's a definite correlation there, isn't there? So as promised, we want to introduce 5 steps to improvement, steps that you can take to ensure the accuracy of the final reports being sent to referring physicians, charts, and patients. You need to develop the standards, the who, what, where, when, how. We talked about all of those. What are you going to measure? Who's going to do those? We didn't really talk about when. It needs to be continuous. We actually, as SpeechCheck, do this quarterly. We do a big audit first, and then we do quarterly audits of a smaller amount. But it is on a regular basis, and it is measured and trended continuously. And then how? What are you going to measure? The thing that, if you get nothing else out of this webinar, I want to reiterate that you need to listen to the voice when you're reading the reports. The best method that we have found, and we have tested everything, is to print out the reports, listen to the reports, and mark them up manually. When you're reading the computer screen, you have a different focus. So print them out, whoever's doing this, and listen to the reports as you go. Measure one thing. You can measure everything, as I said, but let's just start with one thing. How many addendums are coming out of your department due to errors? How many complaints do you get? Start writing them down, even if it's just an FYI. How many calls or verbal cues are you getting from referring physicians and or patients? Or track just the critical errors. How many reports are being sent back to you that you kind of slap yourself in the forehead and say, oh my gosh, how did this happen? Third, you want to audit those reports. We talked about 50 reports per radiologist. That's a pretty average number. We actually start with 100, but 50 is a good solid number. And again, make sure that it's the voice file, not just the voice. Sorry. You want to review with your radiologist and communicate the parameters, the actual reports with the errors, and highlight the strengths. And you want to do this in person, and you want to go over it one by one with them, mistake by mistake, so that they know what they did. There's that old saying, you can't fix what you don't know is broken. And then lastly, track the improvement. Use spreadsheets, use trending, and post those results if appropriate. Not everyone wants that. They can be de-identified, but it is interesting, and especially with radiologists being competitive, it works.
Cool. And, you know, there are so many topics we like to talk about as it relates to documentation improvement, and I love the idea of building good documentation habits. What do we need to do to break the old habits and create new ones, especially as it relates to using software such as speech recognition. And I love chatting through just quality improvement plans, but in an hour, we are really only able to swim on the surface. Our goal today is just to give you a vision of what your department could look like with good documentation, or with documentation that was constantly improving. This needs to become a part of your culture, not just a one-time deal. This needs to improve over time. In the future, we believe that winners will be separated from losers in radiology, at least to some degree, by how fanatical the winners are devoted to the accuracy of documentation and wanting to constantly improve. Imagine a culture in your organization where even the smallest typo was seen as not a source of pride, but as a failure. We would like to see accurate radiology documents across the United States.
And we know you already have a lot on your plate, and we really don't want to, you really don't want to, or you can't take on more. But this is really, really, really important. Your patients deserve accurate reports. They deserve the best quality care possible, and you're already providing that in every other area. Accurate documentation is just part of the big picture. One goofy mistake, while it can sound funny, can cause a patient to panic or have stress or undue anxiety, or even worse, if it's a negative report, they could be lost to follow-up. Why go back to the doctor if the report says I'm okay? It can lessen their belief in the quality of your care, and especially if it's an obvious crazy error, like a word that makes no sense. Remember, patients don't understand the same language that all of us do. Referring physicians could also take that same track and say, hey, we're going somewhere where they care and they've read their reports. It all reflects on your entire organization. So no matter what you decide to measure, review, and improve those reports, you need to do it either using external resources or an outside company. That first step is hard, deciding to track the quality. It's scary to think what you might find, but it's not something you can ignore. Once you realize that and truly believe, you need to make it happen. So in the words of Nike, just do it. The process doesn't have to be perfect, but your documentation needs to be as perfect as possible.
So in the very beginning of our presentation, we gave you 3 objectives, 3 things that we would like to cover. And as a reminder, they were these. We wanted to identify the reasons that quality documentation is critical, and we believe that it's critical. And I hope that you at least understand our passion for it and that you agree. We wanted to explore the moving pieces of a quality improvement plan for your radiologists. We would like to see your culture change in this area as you implement changes and improvements just a little bit at a time. And finally, to help you do that, we introduced 3 steps that you should take to measure and improve the accuracy of your final reports before they're sent to referring physicians, charts, and patients. Now, how do we do after a few, sorry for my voice, but I only got a few minutes left, so I think I'm going to make it. How do we do? After a few shameless plugs and announcements, we are going to open this up to questions for the time that we've got left. And if we don't get them all in, and sometimes we don't, we'll have contact information for you on the next slide.
So here are our shameless plugs. Some of you have heard these before, but I want to go over them again. We do a lot of webinars. We do 4 to 6 a year with AHRA. We do them with other organizations. We do weekly webinars on different topics within SpeechCheck. If you have any idea on something you would like to hear about, let us do that research for you. Let us do the educating for your department. It can be totally off the topic of quality as long as it has to do with radiology. We're open to ideas. So please, those are mine and Ken's emails. They're simple. It's Lee, spelled the boy way, at SpeechCheck.com, and Ken, also spelled the boy way, at SpeechCheck.com. We are both open to suggestions. Give us some feedback. I'll even take criticism. I'll cry, but I will take criticism. But we're really looking for some ideas. We want our content to be fresh, and we want to take some of the pressure off of you. We can help train. We can help educate, anything you need. We are also going to be at AHRA in Vegas, yay, in July, the 19th to the 23rd. We hope to see many of you there. In fact, give us a shout out and tell us you're going to be there. We have some fun things planned. As always, we're going to have the root beer again, a local one, which will be a lot of fun. And we definitely want you to stop by. Just ask us some questions, sit through a presentation, or just hang out. A lot of people just come and hang out with us. We're fun people. And it is in Vegas, remember, yay. And lastly, I want to point out that it's important to support the AHRA and the Foundation, especially the Expanding Excellence campaign. Foundation does a lot for all of us. They produce these webinars. They do a lot of training sessions. They give scholarships. They just do a lot for our industry in general. So if you can volunteer, it doesn't have to be monetary. It's always appreciated, but time and talent. Volunteer at the annual convention, volunteer for spring and fall. We're there and we'd love to see you. And I'm going to give Ken just a second before we turn it over to questions to give a little plug about his presentation that he's going to be doing. Lots of fun. It's in Vegas.
Well, thank you. And I know that whenever we do commercials, everybody immediately starts to multitask. So we would prefer that you multitask by asking us questions. We've got one or two pending already, but there is a question box at the top of your screen. So while I am giving my commercial, you can go ahead and ask questions. On Tuesday, the Tuesday of the AHRA convention in Vegas, I will be giving a presentation entitled Pole Vault Instead of Limbo, Why Obsessive Attention to Documentation Quality Always Pays a Huge Return. And during that presentation, we are going to cover a little bit more, actually a lot more, the details of the various things we found while doing quality audits with radiology departments across the country. If you're one of our customers, and we have some of them on the line, don't worry, we're not going to single you out. That's not what we do. One of the advantages of seeing lots of documents is that we can aggregate data in a de-identified way, and we have learned a ton that we think is important to start pushing out there so that documentation can be improved whether or not you're contracting with us. That's really our main interest. So in my presentations, number one, my voice will be fully restored, hopefully. Number two, it's not uncommon for me to teach circus tricks or to give away money. In this particular presentation, we are going to have a limbo pole in the room, so depending on how everybody feels at 4 o'clock, we may or may not use it, but it will at least be there. And so, Lee, I'm sorry, I got a note from you. You can't see the questions. I'm going to give you the first one, which says, you made reference to 18 audit points. Can you provide that list? I understand we may need to customize. That's a question we have pending. And Lee, that's for you.
Actually, our list is 16 questions, and I would be happy to give you a general list. Of course, we're not going to give away our trade secrets, but I'm happy to share that list with anyone, just so for consistency across the board. Just give me, anyone who wants that, send it to Lee, L-E-E, at SpeechCheck.com, and I will send it off today.
Okay, I know you can't see the next question, but I'll take a stab. It says, efficacy of disclaimers on voice recognition reports. How are accrediting bodies handling these? You know, I'm not sure I can speak to that from the point of view of an accrediting body, but I think I could probably speak to it on behalf of how that would appear to a judge and jury. And I mean, my initial thought to that is I wouldn't think that provides very much protection at all. But Lee, you might have come across something different.
No, I would have the exact same answer. I don't know why I can't see the questions. I apologize, everyone.
At least I can see them. That's what I've got. Oh, we have a thank you. Good. One other question. We occasionally get questions about software and the use of software and analytics and documentation. We love that. At AHRA this year, while you're stopping by our booth, make sure that you visit the radiology analytics vendors, simply because the data that they can provide across a large sampling of documentation is, we believe, is very, very, very useful, especially when combined with low-level analysis like what we do in customized coaching. For the person who asked about the our scale, again, we could provide you with some generics, but there are resources out there that you should be able to use. The important thing is just to start auditing. Find people in your organization or outside your organization with the skill set to really open up the hood and see what you've got running under there in terms of documents. And I think that's about what we've got time for. We're a couple minutes past 3 o'clock Eastern, so Lee, I think we're going to sign off and call it a day. Is that right?
I have one more thing to say. I was just kidding about not sending you our errors, please, if you ask for them, I will certainly send them to you. They're not a secret. We have them on all of our webinars. We have them in all of our proposals. So I will definitely send it. Again, it's lee@speechcheck.com. And please send us some webinar ideas. They're usually not an hour long, just the AHRA ones are. They're usually 15 to 17 minutes long. You can do it as a lunch and learn, and I would be happy to send you our current schedule. Promise not to overwhelm your inbox with emails, but if you want our current webinar schedule, please send me an email and we will add you to the webinar only list. We also have a newsletter once a month, so just please say webinar only or newsletter also. Thank you very much, and we hope to see you at AHRA. If you're going to be there, again, give us a shout out on those emails. Tell us you're going to be there and we'll watch out for you. Thanks again and have a great day.
Have a good afternoon, everybody.